The new head of Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, Sanae Takaichi, has been considering whom to appoint to her cabinet.
The hardline conservative is on track to become the country's first ever female prime minister if she wins the parliamentary vote next Wednesday. The LDP elected her as the new party president on Saturday in a tightly contested leadership race. She replaces outgoing Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba as party leader. Ms. Takaichi is a political veteran who has held multiple cabinet positions. She's a protege of the late Shinzo Abe and has vowed to revive his Abenomics policies.
As a nationalist, she's been calling for tighter restrictions on immigration. The LDP has a fragile hold in power through its coalition with the smaller Komeito party. The coalition lost its majority in both houses of parliament over the past year. Ms. Takaichi will now need to secure a simple majority of votes in next week's special Diet session to be confirmed as prime minister.
And for more on what we can expect from Ms. Takaichi's leadership of the LDP and possibly Japan, let's speak with William Pesek. He's columnist and author of Japanization. He joins us from Tokyo. William, good to have you on the show this morning. We are saying Japan's next prime minister, maybe. Now, can anything go wrong between now and October 15th when a vote takes place in the Diet?
Well, the one thing that could go wrong is that Takaichi, as you mentioned in your intro, she's a veteran, but she's also known to have very sharp elbows. She's at a moment where she has to basically mend fences and win the support of opposition parties. A lot of these opposition parties, they want tax cuts in return for their support. And the one thing that could fall apart there would be her unwillingness to bend to their demands. But, for the most part, I think the odds are reasonably low because if you're in the opposition, you want to have some say in the government going forward. And so, I think that the odds pretty much favor her being able to cobble together some kind of governing coalition, and she will be prime minister.
So when she says that now the LDP has its first female president, its scenery is going to be changing a little, in what ways do you think it might actually change? I mean, we all know her as a conservative with very traditional views.
Well, what I find interesting here is, in the last month or so, I've, kind of kicked the tires and talked to every Japanese I can, talk to about the election. And women are not wildly enthusiastic about her being the first female prime minister because she's no one's idea of a progressive feminist, right? I mean, little things like, for instance, she is against couples, married couples being able to use different surnames. She's against Japan having another female empress, even though Japan has had at least 8 in the past. She's against same-sex marriage. And so in many ways, it is great to have this milestone, this glass ceiling shattered, but do women see this as a moment where she'll actually lower the, in many ways, shatter the glass ceiling more broadly for the other half of Japan's population? I think that remains to be seen.
Since you mentioned the moment, I wonder how you define it, because some are wondering if Takaichi's Japan is heading for a Thatcher moment with bold stimulus and nationalism, or a Liz Truss risk where ideology meets economic reality, given her anti-immigration stance and potential postponement of a rate hikes. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, either road would be worrisome in different ways. Certainly, she is an adherent to Abenomics, and Abenomics, which is something that was implemented in 2012, 2013. It didn't really revive Japan's economy, but what it did do is it's increased Japan's debt load. It weakened the yen. It also left the Bank of Japan with a balance sheet bigger than Japan's entire economy, which is a first for a G7 economy. She wants to double down on Abenomics, which means that she will open up the fiscal floodgates again. Japanese government bonds last month rose to their highest level since 1999. So the bond market is already worried about Japan's finances. Japan has a debt to GDP ratio of about 260%, which is by far the biggest in the developed world. This is not a moment for Japan to be considering cutting taxes or spending more because the rating agencies will begin sniffing around. And that's the big concern for markets at the moment. If you're the stock market, maybe you're happy at the moment. If you're the bond market, you're very worried about what's to come because we might see a doubling down of the same policies that didn't do much to revive the economy in the long run, but did do a lot to increase Japan's debt load.
So, William, assuming all goes according to plan, what do you think are going to be her immediate priorities? I mean, we've been hearing about cost of living, immigration, trust in the LDP, maybe even over tourism. And here's an outlier. Right. Could she possibly dissolve the lower house and seek a fresh mandate by calling a snap election?
She could do that, but I think her most immediate challenge is Trump, Trump, Trump. I mean, basically, one of the big wild cards out there is on the campaign trail, she began talking about renegotiating the U.S.-Japan trade tariff agreement, if you will. That'll be fascinating. At the same moment, she's looking for a weaker yen because she wants to revive the economy. That will also put her on a collision course with the Trump administration. Also, one of her immediate priorities is going to be, we have the rise of this kind of Japanese MAGA party, if you will, in Japan, the Sanseito party. So there is this right-wing movement. A lot of young Japanese are very disillusioned about the fact the economy at the moment is not exactly performing that well. They're worried about the future. And I think in many ways, the LDP is having an identity crisis where it sees that the electorate is upset and is trying to adjust to that. And so I think it'll be Trump, it'll be the economy, but it will also be young Japanese who don't see a very bright future and how to, sort of thread that needle, if you will.
Okay. And William, since you mentioned Mr. Trump, Ms. Takaichi is expected to face diplomatic trial by fire, if I can say that. Mr. Trump's visit to Tokyo in late October, followed by the APEC in Seoul, which could offer a possible face-to-face meeting with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Can she manage Japan's alliance with Washington without provoking Beijing?
I think it'll be a very, very difficult, again, very difficult needle to thread. One of the interesting wild cards, though, however, her mentor is Shinzo Abe. And people seem to remember Shinzo Abe as being this Trump whisperer. But in many ways, Shinzo Abe was very weak towards Trump, right? I mean, he basically, enabled him. He, nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize, got very little in return, rather. Will Takaichi be a stronger leader towards Trump, push back and say we need to renegotiate the trade deal, or will she be Abe-esque and say yes, master? And so I think that is a kind of wild card that nobody can explain at the moment. And I think you have seen this détente in recent months between China, between South Korea and Japan. I think in many ways North Asia is so upset about the Trump trade war that they're talking again. Is that now derailed as we see Takaichi, a leader who might be visiting Yasukuni Shrine any week now, taking over?
So William, just to press on that point a little bit more. So what do you think this could mean for ties with Beijing and Seoul? We know she's a China hawk for one thing. You just talked about, that visit to the shrine as well, which apparently she does at least once a year, perhaps even more.
She's a China hawk, and I think, one thing we're seeing is, the LDP, as I mentioned before, is having something of an identity crisis. And probably the easiest way for her to excite the LDP, the rank and file, is to be hard on China. One of the things that she'll have to do, first of all, is to stay around for more than 12 months. The revolving door is spinning. Prime Minister Ishiba had 12 months. Most Japanese prime ministers only get 12 months. And she will have to work very, very hard to make sure that she's around for longer than 12 months. And at that point, she probably will have latitude to make some reforms in the economy, politically speaking. But I think in many ways, one of her immediate challenges will be to put some wins on the board and stay around for more than 12 months. And the easiest way to win support within the party, unfortunately, for better or worse, is to go after China. So it should be interesting.
All right, William, thank you so much for your thoughts and time this morning. William Pesek is columnist and author of Japanization.